What's up, everyone? Tom here from Metalloud, and I'm here for another review. I know it's been quite some time, so we're going to kick things off with one of my favorite bands coming back from a bit of hiatus, and that is Say Anything with their album Is Committed. Now, this album is interesting because a lot of the original members have joined back into the band, so you'd be expecting some kind of return to form in some ways, and based on the singles they released, including Psych, then you would kind of expect that's what we're going for. It's very energetic, very chaotic, very acerbic, very sarcastic, and everything we come to expect from the band Say Anything. And hopefully that would have translated to the rest of the album. Unfortunately, it didn't really quite get there. So to start with things that this album does really well, there are some very solid songs. There's some really great choruses. There's some gang vocals in here. There's some really good harmonies between Sherry Dupree and Max Bemis. There's definitely some great guitar licks on here. There's some very chaotic moments. There's some time signature changes in here. Things that we kind of expect from Say Anything, especially in the earlier days of things. It's, in a way, a return to form musically. The only issue you run into is that vocally and lyrically, it kind of falls apart. The overall theme of the album is, right away from the beginning track, is kind of nostalgia and going back into being kids and rediscovering the music you loved, and kind of saying, hey, let's look at this as we were when Say Anything first came out, and let's see what we feel about it now. And it kind of sets the expectation that this is going to be everybody's favorite album is a Real Boy, and kind of a continuation of that, when that's not what this is. And it's one thing for the lyrics to kind of differentiate, or the sound to kind of sound a little bit different, or to not get some of the elements that we're kind of expecting from a band like that. But the problem is the lyrics are often so just downright cringy. They're very over-sexualized in a way of... if you know anything about Max Bemis in the last several years or so, and particularly about his hiatus, he hinted at and explicitly stated about how he was rediscovering his sexuality. And there's moments on the last album, All Very Appropriate, talking about how he doesn't really get this sexuality as a spectrum and things like that. And in the sense of that, he's learning it, but not really quite understanding it. And I feel like this album, lyrically especially, he's gone too leaning into that and kind of overcompensating, where every song feels like it has to be something to do with sex, or there's a sexual innuendo, or there's something going on. And it's not like this is a first for Say Anything. It's not like they haven't had sexual innuendos or things like that in the past. It's just they were significantly more subtle. For instance, the song Riding South, the line "Come pollinate me," hey, it's referencing pollinating flowers. It's a metaphor. It's not just, hey, I'm gonna come. And for that, it kind of falls a little bit short. It feels a little bit juvenile and childish in that way. And it comes off a lot of times feeling like an album that doesn't really need to exist. There's so many topics for them to talk about, and Say Anything and Max Bemis have proven that they can handle and tackle more mature topics. For instance, the album Hebrews, which is essentially a concept album traveling through the stages of the birth of his child. And to me, that album really works because of that narrative, and it doesn't try to go too childish. It doesn't try to go anywhere with that. It doesn't try to make anything sexual. It doesn't try to make these really juvenile jokes. And it just is committed, unfortunately, suffers from that. And I say unfortunate because a lot of the music on here is very, very strong. The band seems to be back together. They seem to be doing a really good job. Everything seems to be pretty cohesive. It's nice to kind of hear them. There's some elements that you kind of go back and say, oh, this sounds like it could have been on Is a Real Boy or In Defense of the Genre or Self-Titled or any of those. And you get that feeling, but then once the lyrics start, it kind of all goes to waste. And I can always appreciate an artist for talking about what they want to talk about and things like that. I just feel like it feels forced. It feels like he's saying, I wasn't into this sexual dynamic or anything like that, so now I gotta make it full force. And the whole album is essentially all about it. It's very sexually charged, and not necessarily in a good way, but it definitely, there's a lot of elements that are there that are strong that I feel like this album could have risen above that. And even with the lyrics, I feel like it could have risen above that juvenile aspect of things. But for the most part, I really don't know who this album is necessarily for. It starts off talking about being kids with me again, and you get the sense that he's trying to say, hey, I know you're in your late 20s, 30s, maybe even 40s, and, why don't you come shed all that and just enjoy this music that I'm putting out, and let's dip into the nostalgia. But there is no nostalgia here is the problem, because it never quite gets to the heights of any of their previous albums. There's elements there, there's parts that sound like they could be on those albums, but nothing to the degree that this is, reminiscent of, oh, this sounds like Is a Real Boy, or this could be a song off of Is a Real Boy, or this could be a song off of this. It really never gets to that point, and the end result is just kind of a mess, and on top of that, a cringy mess of why did you need to make that lyric, or why did you need to make it about coming, or about vibrators, or about anything like that. And it feels like it comes off as Max Beam is saying, ooh, I'm gonna be edgy, and I'm gonna push the envelope with this, and they're not gonna know what hit them, and look at all these metaphors and about sex and stuff like that. And he's done it better previously, where this just feels forced. This feels so unnecessary to have talked about it like this, that lyrically, specifically, it drags this album down, and it drags it down. I mean, if I was basing off of the musical content and about the songs that actually do work, like the singles actually worked, Are You In There or Psych are actually amazing Say Anything songs. I mean, those I would put within the top songs that they've ever made. But then you get everything else, like I Vibrator or On Come, and not even just the titles are cringy enough, it's just the songs are good enough. I mean, On Come at least has a kind of a catchy chorus to it, but at the end of the day, it's not enough to elevate that song or to make it really worth it. So overall, Say Anything's Is Committed is unfortunately a disappointment. And I say this as somebody who is a massive Say Anything fan. And I use the word disappointment because I don't necessarily think the album is the worst thing that I've heard, but it feels like I know what they were going for, and I feel like they could have done a lot better at kind of toning down some of the sexual innuendos and just the overtly sexiness of it, because it doesn't send any kind of message. It's not empowering. It's not freeing. It's just kind of there for shock value and for humor, and I think we're kind of past that point where it just really does not work. But it's still, again, not the worst album. I'm not necessarily, if you're a Say Anything fan, I suggest checking it out. You may or may not like it. It also depends what kind of Say Anything album, whatever Say Anything fan you are. If you're a fan of just Is a Real Boy, then probably not going to vibe with this. If you're somebody who kind of appreciate their entire discography, you may find something in this that you like. Just overall, I don't think it worked as well as they were hoping, and I'm hoping that this is kind of a rough step as a start. Remember that they just kind of got back together with the original members, so I'm hoping, one, the original members stay, and two, we kind of get a more solid, cohesive, realistic, and less cringy album from them. So that was a review of Say Anything's Is Committed. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.